Everyone was waiting for this. We have a Chicago Bulls update as we get into Lonzo Ball's comments on the injury that ended his season last year, the workouts, and what he had to do throughout the offseason to get up back into game shape, and of course, the expectations we should have of him going into the 2025-2026 season. Hello, my name is Isaias Jackson Jr. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Bulls Digest. We got to get into all the news and notes regarding Lonzo Ball's comments on the injury last season, and of course, his expectations and our expectations going into next year as well. However, 67.5% of you guys are not subscribed. 32.5% of you guys are. We appreciate you guys on both sides of the field. Look, I'm in Indiana right now. It has been dark and gloomy. I haven't seen the sun once at all today. And one thing that you can do to make it bright and sunshiny over here on my side of town is hitting that subscribe button, liking and sharing. And also just a huge thank you for tuning into Bulls Digest. Lonzo Ball announces injury update after missing 22 straight games. Chicago Bulls guard Lonzo Ball makes injury update after 22 games absence during the season, of course, coming from Liam Willerup as well. And I remember even there being a point in time when Lonzo Ball was supposed to join the team during a road trip, and unfortunately, we just never seen him again after that. And this is after the team got hot, with the quickness going into that second half of the season. And so just looking at it here, the Chicago Bulls were one of the top stories of the second half of the NBA season, going 17-10 after the All-Star break and seeing stellar play from several players on their roster that included their backcourt of Kobe White and Josh Giddey, who proved that they could be the future backcourt in Chicago if the team is fine with paying both of them, something that we have covered extensively here on Bulls Digest. However, the second half stretch happened without former second overall pick Lonzo Ball, who spent most of his season yet again on the sidelines. Of course, his 4-year contract in Chicago, something that we should just put a huge star right next to. Across his 4-year contract in Chicago, he's played just 70 games due to constant injury. And of course, we've seen the unfortunate injury that we seen with his leg. Stephen A. Smith coming out and saying that the man could barely walk. Him pretty much going down on that one leg, saying that he's perfectly fine. Like Stephen A. Smith is just making rumors. We seen the drama behind the leg injury with Lonzo Ball. Always expecting when he's going to return, and then seeing he was gone for pretty much close to 2 years. And it just really was a gut punch to fans, not only for the Chicago Bulls, but just huge fans of Lonzo Ball who were expecting to see the man come through and pretty much bring that same play that he had with the New Orleans Pelicans with the Chicago Bulls. The Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Zach Lavine trio was supposed to be huge. At least when I saw it, I was geeked. I thought this was going to be the next big thing. I wasn't going to say, this is going to be a big three, but I thought the future was going to be insanely bright for the Chicago Bulls. And of course, you've seen how it has fared out for the Chicago Bulls. So he is set to return next year, though. He and has provided an update on his status on a recent podcast episode. And so even going through there, because of course that's just how we all do it now. We always got to communicate through podcasts. I'm feeling great, man. This is Lonzo Ball, and I quote, "I'm feeling great, man. Back on the court this week, man. Moving around. Got a long summer. Gearing up for next year," Ball said on an episode of What an Experience with Lonzo Ball earlier in May. Ball had originally told the team he was going to join them on their 6-game road trip during March, but ended up missing that and the rest of the season, which was something I alluded to earlier. So Lonzo Ball is feeling great. And it's something that we've heard him say numerous of times as he's dealing with a rehab. And also, just a huge shout out, because a lot of people don't really focus on how mentally draining an ACL injury, just a really huge injury can be. The rehabs are extensive, are excruciating, are just painful. Of course, your mindset, you're worried about your mental health. So much goes through that. While a lot of guys just think, oh, well, he tore his ACL, he's just going to be sitting on the couch for 9 months. Like, no, you're training. There's so much rehab that goes to this. That rehab sucks. It's just everything that goes about that. And it just... I always like to look at, documentaries and like to look at guys talk about what they've gone through with their injuries, because a lot of guys don't really handle it, perfectly. I think Klay Thompson is a perfect example, a guy that has gone through a guy that went through two ACL injuries. and came two serious leg injuries and had to come back like it was nothing. And you got to give a whole lot of credit where credit is due to guys like Klay Thompson, to guys like Zach Lavine, and to guys like Lonzo Ball. Because Lonzo Ball is not just at the legs; it's the wrist injuries as well. You know, as which was one of the which was the injury that kept him out last season. But and we saw him dealing with shoulder injuries as well. When Lonzo Ball, I think injury prone has been glued to his name, and we can't say it isn't fair because I mean the writing has been on the wall since his Laker days. I mean hell, we could go to his UCLA days. I mean we go to his high school days. You know we've seen Chino Hill days. You know we've seen Lonzo Ball deal with long extensive history with injuries, and that's what the Chicago Bulls signed up for when they brought him to the Chicago Bulls, when they wanted him to put pen to paper, which he did. But that also brought in more help. You know, of course, Josh Giddey with the Alex Caruso trade was, of course, a huge piece. And the Josh Giddey, Kobe White backcourt has been absolutely amazing. But, of course, you've seen the likes of what Trey Jones can do. Of course, Javon Carter was there, even though we didn't see a whole lot of them. You saw a lot of guards, you know, come through with Dallin Terry switching off from shooting guard to small forward. You know, you're seeing a whole lot of movement going through with the rotation as well. And we brought this up before, you know, how much talent is going to come through and how much room is there going to be for Lonzo Ball. Because as we mentioned before, I know this is kind of a rundown quote, but your best ability is availability. So with Lonzo Ball being out uh, for a great amount of time, and especially with the injuries that he's sustaining and the injuries that he's dealing with, you know, these aren't just, you know, a hamstring pull and you're out for a couple weeks. You know, these are injuries that are keeping him out for months on end. So this is a huge gamble that you're taking when you're having Lonzo Ball on your team. Now, of course, he's been on the rumor mill a couple times, but as we mentioned before, the injury prone tag is still on your name. Now, we're going to look at his stats. We're going to see what he provides for your team on the floor, but we just got to have you on the floor. That has pretty much been the biggest thing so far for Lonzo Ball. And of course, you're seeing quotes from guys like a DeMar DeRozan. When you talk about a piece that's missing for something, Lonzo was that piece of the puzzle that put everything together for all of us. He made everything so easy. And when the Chicago Bulls were spot on, you know, you saw Lonzo Ball play some solid basketball. You know, Lonzo Ball, you can't say that Lonzo Ball just didn't entertain you throughout his whole time in Chicago. Lonzo Ball definitely has had his highlight moments. Lonzo Ball has definitely had some, at least in the beginning, in that first run with the Chicago Bulls, there was some daylight. And then, of course, as the years progressed, when, of course, he suffered that leg injury, and then, of course, you've seen the wrist, you know, things just kind of faltered from then on out. But is there still hope for Lonzo Ball? That's just going to be the question we're going to ask ourselves at the tail end of it all. So even though it looks like his days as a high-impact starter are in the past, such as his time with New Orleans, with the New Orleans Pelicans, Ball has showed in his limited actions that in his season that he can still be effective. The former second overall pick averaged 7.6 points, 3.3 rebounds per game in 35 games this year. And so, I mean, we can just see it right here on the graphics. You know, if we could go into further detail here for Lonzo Ball, 7.6 points, 3.4 rebounds, 3.3 assists. Right now, 6'6", 27 years old, 37% on corner threes, 36% from the field, but 34% from three-point range as well. And I love Lonzo Ball, and I feel like a lot of people are fans on Lonzo Ball. A lot of people root for Lonzo Ball because at first, you know, it was all about BBB, at first it was all about BBB, Big Baller Brand, LeVar Ball. You know, it was all about, and then of course you seen Patrick Beverly go out there and try to dog him in his very first game. And, you know, I felt like a lot of people were rooting against Lonzo Ball. You started to see him improve. You started to see him prove himself within the Los Angeles Lakers organization. Then, of course, he went over to the New Orleans Pelicans, and you've seen the great work that was done there. And then, of course, you see him in Chicago. And every time you think you see a spark, of Lonzo Ball becoming more consistent. You start to see Lonzo Ball a little bit more often. You start to see him contribute a little bit more on the floor. You start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It just starts getting darker and darker. But Lonzo Ball says he's gearing up. He's ready to go. Do you believe Lonzo Ball? Are you ready to put your faith in Lonzo Ball that he can play more than 70 games in a season? And that's no insult on the man. I am rooting for Lonzo Ball 100%. But we're just hoping and putting our best wishes that this man at this point in time going into next season can have not only a healthy season next year, but a healthy career. Do you think it's time to move on from Lonzo Ball? Are you worried that he's not going to stick it through the full season in terms of staying healthy? Or are you rooting with Lonzo Ball all the way? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.